The Enigma Clock. Arthur Bell didn't expect much excitement that Tuesday afternoon. His antique shop, tucked away on a quiet street, was usually a haven of stillness, disturbed only by the occasional curious customer. He was sorting through a box of old trinkets when he noticed a package he hadn't seen before, sitting on the counter. There was no return address. No note, just his name written neatly across the brown wrapping paper. Intrigued, Arthur carefully tore open the package. Inside was a clock, unlike any he had ever seen. It was small, yet heavy, with a brass frame that gleamed faintly under the shop's dim lights. The face was covered by a clear glass dome, revealing a tangle of exposed gears that clicked inward softly. But what caught Arthur's attention were the symbols on the clock face. There were no numbers, just strange, delicate markings that he couldn't quite make out. And on the back, a single word was engraved: Tempest. He set the clock on the counter and watched it for a while, expecting it to move in the usual, predictable way. But it didn't. The hands twitched forward, then jerked back, sometimes spinning in circles as if they were lost. It was broken. That much was clear, but Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this clock than met the eye. Just as he was about to turn away, the clock let out a soft chime, a clear, melodic sound that seemed to hang in the air. Arthur blinked, and suddenly, the world around him went blurry. He felt a strange pull, like he was being yanked out of his own body. When his vision cleared, he wasn't in his shop anymore. He was standing on a cobblestone street, surrounded by people in old-fashioned clothes. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He could smell the faint scent of coal smoke in the air, and he heard the clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the road. Panic surged through him as he glanced down, half expecting to see the familiar counter and his dusty old register. But no, he was still holding the clock, and everything else had changed. He hadn't moved at all. Time had. It took a while for Arthur to wrap his head around what was happening. The first time the clock chimed, he was dropped into what seemed like a random street in Victorian London, watching strangers bustle by as if he were invisible. Then, without warning, he was back in his shop, the clock ticking quietly, as if nothing had happened. He could have brushed it off as a weird dream, but it happened again and again. Each time the clock chimed, Arthur found himself transported to a different place, a different moment in time. Once, he was in a smoky tavern, watching the men whisper urgently in a corner. Another time, he was in a dimly lit room, where a woman was hurriedly packing a suitcase, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst in. The scenes were vivid, detailed, and over before he could make sense of them. Every time, he'd be snapped back to his shop, his hands still wrapped around the clock. At first, it was just confusing, but soon, Arthur began to notice something odd. These weren't just random moments in history, there was a pattern. The people he saw were always doing something secretive, hiding a letter, passing a message, burning documents. The scenes were charged with tension, as if each action was part of a larger, hidden story. Arthur wasn't a historian, but he had a good sense for the past. He realized that whatever he was seeing, it wasn't in the history books. These were events that had been erased, lost, or covered up, and the more he watched, the clearer it became that these moments were connected. They weren't just isolated incidents, they were pieces of a puzzle. One night, after yet another strange trip through time, Arthur decided he needed answers. He spent hours scouring his shop, hoping to find something, anything that could explain the clock's power. He thumbed through old catalogs, dug out history books, even searched online, but there was nothing about a clock that could bend time. As the days passed, the clock's behavior became more erratic. Sometimes it would chime without warning, pulling Arthur into the past in the middle of a conversation or while he was closing up for the night. Other times, it would go silent for days, as if it was waiting for something. Arthur started to carry it with him everywhere, afraid of what might happen if he wasn't around to witness whatever it had to show him. Then, one evening, the clock chimed, and Arthur found himself in a dark alley. The air was cold, and the street was empty, except for a man standing a few feet away. The man's face was hidden under the brim of a hat, but Arthur could see he was holding something, another clock, just like his. The man looked up, and for the first time, one of the figures in these visions seemed to see Arthur. He didn't say anything, just raised the clock and nodded, as if acknowledging Arthur's presence. Then, without a word, the man disappeared, leaving Arthur alone in the alley. The vision faded, and Arthur was back in his shop, his heart racing. He had so many questions. Who was that man? How did he know about the clock? Was he the one who had sent it to Arthur? Over the next few weeks, Arthur's life became a blur of chimes, visions, and frantic research. He followed the clues the clock gave him, piecing together a story that spanned centuries. He learned about a secret society that had existed for generations, a group dedicated to manipulating time to keep certain events hidden. They had been erasing moments from history, altering the past to protect their own interests, and the clock was somehow connected to their work. But it wasn't until Arthur found an old newspaper article, buried in a box of forgotten papers, that he finally understood. The article mentioned a brilliant inventor who had disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind rumors of a device that could see through time. The man's name was engraved on the back of the clock Tempest. Arthur realized that the clock wasn't just showing him the past, it was showing him the truth. The man he had seen in the alley was one of the society's members, and the clock was their tool. They had used it to keep their secrets hidden, and now, for some reason, it had ended up in Arthur's hands. The clock chimed once more, and Arthur knew this time would be different. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of the story. As the world around him blurred and faded, he braced himself for whatever the clock had in store, ready to face the past and change it, if he had to.